My name is Claire Voss. I am 31 years old, and the morning I opened my grandmother's 80th birthday party invitation and saw the framed family photo displayed on the front, I did not recognize it at first. Everyone was there. My mother, my father, my uncle Gerald, my cousins, my grandmother herself in her yellow dress holding her garden hat. Everyone except me. I stood at my kitchen counter for a long time, turning that card in my hands. I am a photographer. I know what a cropped image looks like. I know the soft, telltale edge where a program clips a frame and pretends the space was always empty. And I know, because I took the original photo myself, exactly who had been standing to the left of my grandmother when the shutter closed. But what Ethan did not know, what none of them understood yet, was that the same photograph he had cut me out of was already in production at a magazine I worked for. And my name was on the license. Before I tell you what happened when the issue went to print, tell me where you are right now and what time it is there. Are you somewhere quiet, or somewhere that makes you feel like you have to be smaller than you are? Stay with me, because what my brother thought was editing turned out to be evidence. I grew up in Millhaven, Ohio, population 4,200, the kind of town where the same families have occupied the same pews for 3 generations, and your grandmother's name is on a park bench. The Voss family had roots there going back to my great-great-grandfather, who ran a grain operation along the river. By the time I was born, all that remained of that history was a collection of photographs, a surname on a hardware store that my uncle still operated, and a sense that family identity was something to be curated and displayed rather than simply lived. My grandmother, Meredith Voss, turned 80 that October. She was small, deliberate, and deeply proud of 2 things, her garden and her family record. She kept photo albums in a cedar chest that smelled like cedar and old lavender, organized by year, labeled in her careful handwriting. She had albums going back to the 1940s. She showed them to me when I was 7 and told me that pictures were the proof that people had mattered. I did not fully understand what she meant then. I do now. My brother Ethan was 4 years older than me and had spent most of our adult lives positioning himself as the family's representative figure. He organized reunions. He maintained the Facebook page for the Voss Family History Group. He submitted our grandfather's obituary to the local paper with a photo he had chosen himself. He sat on the board of the Millhaven Community Heritage Society. None of this was malicious on its face. He genuinely loved the idea of family history. What he loved more, I came to understand, was controlling the version of it that other people saw. I was a staff photographer at Heartland Living, a regional lifestyle magazine based out of Columbus that covered Midwestern communities, their people, their stories, their histories. I had been there for 4 years. My editor was a woman named Maya Chen, who was precise, demanding, and quietly loyal in the way that only people who have earned their own hard-won place can be. 6 months before my grandmother's birthday, Maya had approached me about a feature called Family Roots. The idea was to document real Midwestern families across several generations, finding people whose history in their communities stretched back far enough to tell a larger story. I had suggested the Voss family. Maya had approved it. I had gone home to Millhaven that July with my camera and 3 days of my life. I photographed the hardware store. I photographed my grandmother's garden. I photographed my Uncle Gerald sorting grain receipts from a decades-old ledger. And on the last afternoon, I gathered everyone in my grandmother's backyard for a family portrait. It was golden hour. My grandmother sat in her yellow dress, holding the garden hat she wore every summer. My parents stood behind her. My Uncle Gerald stood to her right with his arm around his wife. Ethan stood on the other side looking satisfied and photogenic, because Ethan always looked photogenic in family settings. He had a talent for positioning himself in a frame. I handed my camera to Maya, who had come along that day to observe. Maya pressed the shutter. In the image, I stood to the left of my grandmother, close enough that my grandmother's hand rested lightly on my arm. I was the only one in the photo not smiling with my mouth. I was smiling with my eyes, the way photographers learn to smile when they are used to being on the other side of the lens. That image was one of 17 I submitted to Maya for consideration. She selected it as the centerpiece of the feature. We ran it through the magazine's standard licensing process. My name was attached to the file as the submitting photographer. The contract was signed in August. Publication was scheduled for the November issue, which would reach newsstands the third week of October. My grandmother's birthday celebration was the second weekend of that same month. I did not know what Ethan had done until the invitation arrived. He had accessed a printed copy of the family photo, the one I had given my parents after the July shoot. He had scanned it, opened it in an editing program, and cropped me out. Not carelessly, but deliberately. He had used the content fill tool to smooth the space where I had stood, extending the grass and the garden behind my grandmother's chair, erasing the weight of my hand, the line of my shoulder, the fact of my presence entirely. Then he had sent the altered image to a local print shop, framed it in dark wood, and planned to present it to my grandmother at her birthday dinner as a gift from the family. He had also submitted the altered version to the Millhaven Community Heritage Society for their annual display of local family histories, and he had posted it on the Voss family history page with the caption, "4 generations, Millhaven strong." I counted 4 people in that photo. There should have been 5. I did not call Ethan immediately. That instinct, the one that urges you to pick up the phone the moment you feel hurt, is the instinct that gives people like Ethan exactly what they want. An emotional reaction that they can reframe as overreaction. So I sat with the invitation for an hour. I made coffee I did not drink. Then I called Maya. She answered on the second ring. I told her about the invitation. I described the photo on the front. There was a pause on her end that sounded professional rather than sympathetic. "Do you still have the original RAW file?" she asked. I told her I had everything. The RAW file, the camera card, the metadata, the timestamp showing the image was captured at 6:47 in the evening on July 14th, with GPS coordinates corresponding to my grandmother's backyard. I told her my name was on the licensing agreement for the image the magazine was running. Another pause. Then she said, "Do not contact your brother yet. Send me a copy of the original file this evening." I did not sleep much that night, not because I was angry, although I was, but because I kept returning to one specific thing. My grandmother was going to see a photograph of her birthday celebration, her family record, the proof that people had mattered, and she was going to see it with a hole in it where I had been. And she was going to think that was real. What Ethan had done was not just cruel. It was archival. He had tried to rewrite the family's documented history and replace it with a version in which I was absent. He had tried to make my erasure official. I want you to understand something about Ethan before I continue, because he was not a simple person, and simple villains do not hold your attention for 35 years of family dinners. Ethan had genuinely loved me when we were children. He taught me to ride my bicycle on the back road behind our parents' house. He defended me, at 14, when a boy in my class said something ugly on the school bus, and he did it quietly, without drama, which is the kind of defense that actually works. He was the one who gave me my first real camera, a used 35 film camera he found at an estate sale, and who drove me to the 1-hour photo lab every other Saturday so I could see what my pictures looked like. Somewhere in our adult years, something had calcified in him. The family record had become a responsibility he believed he owned, and ownership over time had become control. Maya called me the next morning with a voice I recognized from editorial meetings when something had gone sideways. "There is a problem," she said, "and it actually helps you." Ethan had called the magazine. He had found the issue preview online, a standard promotional post that showed a partial layout including the family photo. In the preview, you could clearly see that the published image was different from the one he had submitted to the Heritage Society. You could see my shoulder. You could see the line of my presence. He had called the editorial line, identified himself as a member of the Voss family, and told the receptionist there had been a photo error, that the wrong version of the image had been submitted, and that the magazine needed to pull the feature before it went to print. The receptionist had passed the message to the licensing desk. The licensing desk had looked at the file, and the licensing desk had noticed that the image in the magazine matched the submitting photographer's name on the contract, and that the image Ethan was describing as correct was a materially altered version with no clear photographer credit and no release documentation. Maya had been looped in that morning. She had called the licensing attorney. The attorney had asked one question: Was the altered image the same photograph? The answer was yes. Same composition, same subjects, same timestamp in the original metadata. One person removed. He didn't just edit you out of a family photo, Maya said carefully. He submitted a derivative work to a public heritage archive, and when he called us to pull the feature, he described himself as having authority over the image. But the image belongs to you. You created it. You licensed it. I understood what she was telling me. I also understood that none of this had been his intention. Ethan had not set out to commit anything. He had set out to curate. He had simply never considered that the photograph had an author because the photographer in the family had always been invisible. What I did not know yet was that Ethan was not finished. 2 days after his initial call to the editorial line, he escalated. He contacted the parent company of Heartland Living's media group through a business email address he found online and sent a formal complaint stating that the magazine had used a family image without proper authorization from all subjects, and that at least one person in the photograph had not consented to publication. He named himself as the family's representative. He did not name me at all. The parent company forwarded the complaint to Heartland Living's legal team. The legal team pulled the file. They found the signed licensing agreement. They found my name attached to it. They found the raw file metadata confirming the photograph had been taken by the submitting party. And they found, on the Public Heritage Society page, the altered image credited to no one, bearing a watermark that said Voss Family Archive. Maya called me at 9 in the morning. Her voice had moved past careful and into something that sounded almost like controlled fury on my behalf. He tried to have the feature pulled through the parent company, she said. He told them you had not consented. He positioned himself as the family authority on a photograph you created and licensed. Claire, he escalated this. I sat with that for a moment. What does that mean for the feature? It is going to print exactly as scheduled, she said, but the legal team wants to speak with you today. His complaint has now created a formal record, which means our response also becomes a formal record. I asked what I needed to do. She said, "Tell the truth. You are very good at that." I called the attorney that afternoon. Her name was Priya Sekaran. She was crisp and unhurried and treated everything I said as though it had weight. I walked her through the July shoot, the submission, the licensing agreement, and then Ethan's initial call to the editorial line, and then the escalation to the parent company. She asked whether I had the original camera card. I said yes. She asked whether the metadata was intact. I said yes. She asked whether I was willing to provide a written statement confirming the image was my original work and that I had authorized its publication through the standard licensing process. I said I was willing. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The complaint has no standing. He cannot speak on behalf of subjects in an image he did not create, but I want you to understand what happens when we respond formally. This becomes documentation. The Heritage Society will receive a copy. His application for the chairmanship may be reviewed in light of the submission that triggered this." I had not thought about that. I thought about it now. "Send the response," I said. "You were never really in it anyway," he had told me at Christmas, 3 years earlier, when I asked why the family album had no photos of me. "You were always just the one taking the pictures." He had said it without cruelty. That was the worst part. He had said it the way you state a fact about the weather. I asked Maya what our options were. She told me the magazine was proceeding with the original feature, which had been legally contracted. She also told me the licensing attorney had prepared a standard infringement notice, which could be sent to the Heritage Society and to anyone who had reproduced the altered image, since it was a derivative of my licensed work. She said it would be my decision whether to send it. I told her I wanted to think about it. She said I had until the end of the week. I spent 3 days thinking. I visited my grandmother that Wednesday under the pretense of helping her press linens for the party. She showed me the framed photo Ethan had brought over for her approval, displayed on the mantelpiece above the fireplace where she kept the cedar chest. I stood in front of that frame for a long time. My grandmother came and stood beside me. She smelled like lavender hand cream and old cedar. She looked at the photo with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who believed she was looking at something true. "You took this," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. She looked at it again. Then she said, in the careful way she said things that mattered, "I don't remember where you were standing." I did not answer that directly. I told her it had been a beautiful afternoon. She nodded and patted my hand. Then she went to put the kettle on. I stood alone in her living room looking at the photo and felt something that was neither anger nor grief, but something adjacent to both. A kind of stillness. The same stillness I feel when I am composing a shot, and the light is exactly right, and I know that what I am about to capture is real and true and will exist long after the moment has passed. I called Maya that evening. I told her to send the notice. What I did not do was warn Ethan. He found out 4 days before the party. He found out because the Heritage Society curator called him to say they had received correspondence from Heartland Living's legal team indicating that the image displayed in their family history exhibition was a derivative work of a copyrighted photograph, reproduced without authorization, and that they would need to remove it from public display pending resolution. Ethan called my parents. Then he called my uncle. Then he drove to my apartment in Columbus, a 3-hour drive he made without calling ahead, arriving at my door at 7 in the evening with the kind of energy that people mistake for passion, but is actually panic wearing a confident coat. I opened the door. He looked at me the way people look at someone they have underestimated and are only now beginning to reassess. "You reported me," he said. I stepped back from the door. "Come in, Ethan." He came in. He did not sit down. He stood in my kitchen with his hands in his jacket pockets and his jaw tight and looked at the collection of framed prints on my wall, which were all photographs I had taken, none of which included our family. "You could have called me," he said. "You could have told me you were upset." "I am not upset," I said, which was true. I had moved past upset. "You are destroying my reputation over a family photo." I poured water for tea because it gave my hands something to do. "Tell me what happened," I said. "From your perspective," he exhaled. He sat down. And this is the part of Ethan I had not expected, not because he surprised me, but because the truth surprised him. He said he had been applying to chair the Community Heritage Preservation Committee. The application required him to demonstrate his family's contribution to local history. He had wanted to submit a strong, clean family image. When he looked at the original photo, he said, he had seen me and thought I would not want to be in it because I was never comfortable in front of the camera. He genuinely believed that. He believed that the person who spent 30 years documenting everyone else had done so because she preferred invisibility. He believed that the absence of photos of me in the family album was a preference I had expressed rather than a silence I had been trained to accept. He had looked at my whole life's pattern, the staying behind the lens, the handing the camera to someone else, the quiet edge of every family gathering, and he had called it a choice. But the rest of what he told me that evening was harder to absorb because it revealed not just carelessness but planning. The Heritage Society chairmanship application required a written statement of family heritage and community contribution. Ethan had been working on it for 3 months. He had pulled records from the County Historical Archive. He had gathered old photos of the hardware store, my great-great-grandfather's grain operation, my grandfather's Army discharge paperwork. He had assembled what he described to me, without any apparent embarrassment, as a portfolio of the Voss family's contribution to Millhaven. In that portfolio, the family portrait was meant to represent the living generation. He had chosen the altered version, he explained, because he wanted the image to read as unified. His word, unified, a family standing together without any visual disruption on the edges. What he meant, though he did not say it plainly, was that he had cropped me out because I did not fit the narrative he was building. I lived in Columbus. I worked for a magazine that was not local. I was not part of the Millhaven story he intended to tell. I was, in his version of things, a Voss who had left. He had not considered that leaving to become a photographer who then came back to document the family's story for a magazine with 140,000 readers might be its own form of contribution. He had not considered it because in his portfolio, I was not the narrator. I was not even a subject. I was simply absent. I asked him whether he had told anyone else about the altered image. He said he had shown the portfolio to 2 board members who had praised the photo as a strong anchor image, Neither of them had known I existed. Ethan had not mentioned me. My name did not appear in his application once. That was the moment I understood that this was not a single act. It was a finished document. A record, submitted to an institution, describing the Voss family without me. That was the kindest and most devastating thing he said that evening. "I thought I was doing you a favor," he said. "I genuinely thought you wouldn't want to be in it." I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "That is the problem, Ethan. You thought, you didn't ask." He pressed his hands flat on the table. "The Heritage Society is pulling the display." "Yes." "The magazine runs Friday." "Yes." "With you in it." "Yes, in the original image, which I took, which I licensed, which has my name on it." He looked at me for a long time. I watched him work through several versions of this, several framings in which I was the aggressor and he was the victim of an overcorrection. I watched him try each one on and find it did not fit the actual facts. "What do you want?" he finally asked. I thought about my grandmother standing in front of the mantelpiece, not remembering where I had been standing. I thought about 30 years of photo albums with no photographs of me. I thought about a girl who was handed a camera at age 7 by her brother and told she had a gift, and then spent the next 24 years using that gift to make everyone else visible while slowly disappearing from the record herself. "I want Grandma to have the real photo," I said. "The original, framed, at the party." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "With you in it." "With me in it." He looked at the table. Then he said, very quietly, "She'll ask why there are 2 photos." "Yes," I said. "She will." He left without finishing the tea. The next 2 days were a particular kind of difficult. Ethan called our mother. Our mother called me. She did not ask what happened. She asked whether I could be reasonable. That word, reasonable, had been used against me so many times in my family that I had stopped hearing it as a request and started hearing it as a verdict delivered in advance. I told her I was being reasonable. I told her the Heritage Society had displayed a copyright infringement. I told her the magazine was running the licensed image as contracted. I told her I was asking for one thing at the party, and that the one thing was the truth. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know your brother meant well." I said, "I know he did. That is not actually the issue." She said, "Then what is the issue?" I said, "I have been in this family for 31 years, and if you look at the official record, I am not in it." Another silence. Then she said, "I never noticed." That answer did not make me angry. It made me sad in a way that felt old and finished rather than fresh. I had always thought the problem was that my family did not see me, but the real problem was that they had never been asked to look. Uncle Gerald called the following evening. He was a straightforward man who had operated the hardware store for decades with minimal drama, and I had always trusted him because he treated money and facts with the same blunt honesty. He said he had heard about the photo. He said he did not fully understand the legal side, but he did understand one thing. He had been at the July shoot. He remembered standing in my grandmother's backyard. He remembered Maya pressing the shutter. He remembered me standing next to Grandma. He said, "You were there, I can tell them that." I told him I appreciated it, but that the camera card already confirmed it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Ethan runs the family page. He runs the reunions. I let him because he wanted to and I didn't. But running something doesn't mean you own it." That was the most he had ever said to me on the subject of family dynamics, and he said it once plainly and then told me to have a good night. I held the phone for a while after the call ended. My father did not call. He sent me a text 2 days before the party that read, "I hope you and your brother can find a way through this before Saturday." I replied, "I hope so too." That was not quite honest. What I meant was, I have already found a way. I am not sure Ethan has. The night before the party, Ethan called me. He did not apologize directly. I did not expect him to. Ethan was the kind of person whose apologies lived inside actions rather than words. He said he had found a print shop in Millhaven still open that evening. He said he had taken the original image file to them, the one I had sent him when he finally asked, and had it printed and framed. He said it would be at the party. I said thank you. He said, "You look good in it." I did not know what to do with that sentence, so I let it sit between us, and eventually, it settled into something that felt almost like a beginning rather than an ending. My grandmother's 80th birthday party was held in the community hall on a Saturday afternoon in late October. The hall smelled like cider and folding tables, and the particular dusty sweetness of a room that hosted 3 generations of potlucks and wedding receptions, and the annual Millhaven Holiday Bazaar. My grandmother sat at the head table in her yellow dress with her garden hat in her lap, and she looked exactly the way people look when they are genuinely happy rather than performing it. Ethan had placed both photos on the display table near the entrance. The altered one was in a smaller frame, off to the side, though he had not hidden it. The original image was in the center, in the dark wood frame my grandmother had first approved for the mantelpiece. In the original, you could see everyone. You could see my uncle and his wife. You could see my parents. You could see Ethan standing on the far side of my grandmother, and you could see me close enough to my grandmother that her hand rested lightly on my arm. My grandmother stood in front of that photo for a long time. Then she called me over. She pointed to the image of me. She touched the glass with one finger lightly, the way she touched things she wanted to remember. "There you are," she said, 2 words, not dramatic. Not a statement about injustice or family or the long accumulated weight of being overlooked, just recognition, simple and exact and true. "There I am," I said. She took my hand and squeezed it. Then she went back to her guests. The Heartland Living feature ran the following Friday. The photograph was on page 22, a full-page spread. Below the image, the credit line read, "Photo by Claire Voss." The caption described the Voss family as 4 generations of Millhaven residents, and then it named each of us. My name was in there, in print, in a magazine that would reach 140,000 readers and live in doctors' offices and waiting rooms and cedar chests for years after the afternoon. I stood beside my grandmother in her garden. Maya sent me a copy of the issue on a Wednesday. She had circled my credit line with a red marker and written one word beside it. Finally. The Heritage Society requested the original image to replace the altered display. Ethan coordinated the transfer. He did it without being asked. Whether that was penance or pride or something in between, I did not examine too closely. The infringement notice was resolved without further legal action because the society had acted in good faith on what they believed to be an authorized submission. The notice had been enough to establish the record. That was all I needed it to be. Ethan and I did not have a formal reckoning. There was no scene, no tearful confession, no moment where he listed his failings and I magnanimously forgave them. We had dinner at my parents' house in November, just the 4 of us, and at some point Ethan asked whether I had extra prints from the feature. He said he wanted one for his wall. I told him I would send him one. He said, "Make sure you're in it." I looked at him across the table. He looked back. Something passed between us that was not an apology and was not absolution, but was perhaps the quieter thing that comes after both. "I will," I said. I do not believe Ethan set out to erase me. I believe he had spent so long watching me make everyone else visible that he had come to understand invisibility as my natural state. He had looked at a pattern shaped by years of accommodation and misread it as preference. That is a kind of blindness that people do not choose. It grows slowly, fed by silence, fed by the absence of the question that should have been asked. The question is not hard. It is only 4 words. Are you in this? I had spent 31 years behind a lens because I was good there and because it was the one place I felt certain of my value. But a photograph is only true when it captures what actually happened. An edited image is not a record. It is a version. And versions, no matter how clean they look, carry the shape of what they removed. My grandmother kept both photos. The altered one went into the cedar chest. The original went onto the mantelpiece where it still stands, 5 people visible, one of them with her grandmother's hand resting on her arm. The room still smells like lavender and cedar. A month after the party, my grandmother called me on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual. She typically wrote letters. She said she had been going through the cedar chest and had found the altered photo Ethan had first given her. She said she sat with it for a while, and then she put it face down in the bottom of the chest beneath the oldest albums, the ones that went back to the 1940s. She said, "I wanted you to know I did that." I asked why she was telling me. She said, "Because you should know where things end up." That was all. She hung up after we talked a while longer about her garden and the first hard frost of November. But I thought about that image lying face down in a cedar chest, beneath 70 years of the family's true record. Beneath the proof that people had mattered. Beneath all the real photographs of all the real moments that no one had edited or arranged or curated into a better story. I thought about the altered photo being stored in the dark, not thrown away, not destroyed, just set aside in a place where it could not be mistaken for the truth. That was my grandmother's version of a verdict. Quiet, final, completely accurate. I am the photographer in this family. I am also in the family. Those two things were never meant to be separate, and I will not allow anyone, not even someone who loves me in the only way they know how, to edit one of them out. I was there. The camera card said so. The magazine said so. And now the mantelpiece says so. So, let me ask you this. Have you ever been removed from something you helped build, not out of anger, but because someone decided your absence was easier than your presence? And if so, did you wait for them to notice, or did you find another way to put yourself back in the frame? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply refuse to disappear.